Hello, crypto world! Welcome to the Chart Historian. My name is Justin, and on this channel, I delve deep into crypto charts, exploring chart structures, fractals, and patterns. I'm going to deep dive into the repetitive macro structure that the Dow Jones has. Now, I've been making videos about the Dow Jones for quite a while, but I've never actually delved into the repetitive macro structure. So in this video, I'm going to lay all that out for you so you can have a good understanding of what this structure does, and you can know what's coming down the pike. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so I'm at the very beginning of the Dow Jones. I'm also on a month candle, so this is a very zoomed out picture of the Dow Jones. So if we were to take the beginning of the Dow Jones, which starts in 1896 and go all the way to 1932, this is the repetitive macro structure, or the first iteration of it. Now, if we were just to take this structure and copy and paste it, because essentially it's repeating. This structure is repeating. But if we were just to copy and paste it onto this side of the chart or the box, we can see that it clearly doesn't match what's taking place on the chart. That's not the way this structure works. So the key to seeing how this structure repeats is to break it up into smaller sections. And that brings up an important point. When a fractal or a structure repeats, the structure or the pattern repeats, but the timing, height, and depth of that pattern is going to be unique to the new iteration. So only the pattern repeats. The timing of it, how long it takes to play out, that's going to be something that will be part of the new structure, or the height of it, that will be part of the new structure, or the depth. Or part of a structure may play out larger than the original part, and another part may play out smaller. So it's very broad in how a structure can repeat. So the key to understanding how this repeats is to break this larger structure up into smaller sections. I've already done this, and I'll show you how it looks. Okay, so I've broken the larger structure into smaller structures. Now, this is the pith of the analysis. This is going to be a unique analysis, so you should pay attention. So the way I break it up, for instance, from 1896 to 1903, the Dow Jones does essentially a bounce. From 1903 to 1906, it does something different. It moves up. Now, these are two kind of easy things to pick out. It gets challenging to break things up correctly. So from 1906 to 1914, it does a range-bound kind of structure, and you could say, well, why don't we just include this in that? And the reason why I don't is because this is a unique move up into this zone. At the end of this box, it drops, and then it does the same thing again. It moves up from 1914 to 1915, and then from 1915 to 1921, it enters into another zone. So from 1921 to 1929, it's very easy to pick this one out as it moves up in a parabolic fashion to a peak. And then from 1929 to 1932, it moves down aggressively to a trough. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to take this structure and copy and paste the fractals over onto this side of the chart. However, just as we broke this part into separate boxes, we're going to need to do the same thing on this side. Try to differentiate where structures end and begin. So I've already made those boxes. I'll show you what they look like. Okay, so here is the first box. This first box takes place from 1932, which is the end of the decline, and it goes all the way to 1942. Now, this box is a structure that repeated from 1896 to 1903. We could see that there are similarities. They both do a bounce. However, there are differences as well. This newer iteration of this bounce over here plays out on a larger time frame. So the timing, height, and depth is going to be, like I said, original to this iteration, even though the basic idea, the bounce, is being copied from this original structure. So what we can do to confirm that this is indeed at play, we can take this fractal, let's copy this structure and make a fractal of it and paste it over here. So try to get the dates lined up, the timing lined up, and we're going to have to stretch it to roughly match this timing. Well, as you can see, it's the same basic concept that has repeated. However, the timing, height, and depth are playing out unique to this new iteration. Okay, so we're back at the original structure, and the next part that we're going to focus on is this part that moves up. It's from 1903 to 1906. What we're going to do is we're going to copy this fractal, and we're going to see if it matches the part of the chart that takes place after the box we were just looking at from 1932 to 1942. So this takes place from 1942 all the way to 1966. It's clearly a large span of time. So if we are correct, even though this part of the chart plays out on a much smaller time frame, this fractal should match the rough outline of what the chart does from 1942 to 1966. So look how small this fractal is compared to this box. However, once we stretch it to the rough timing, height, and depth, we can see that, yes, it actually is a decent match. So what does the fractal do? It hangs out low in the beginning, just like the chart does here. Both the fractal and the chart move up after that. The chart and the fractal both have a series of waves in this move up, and then at the end of the fractal and the chart, it moves up aggressively to a peak. We can even examine these waves and see similarities. So this part on the fractal corresponds to this wave on the chart. This wave on the fractal corresponds to this wave on the chart. And this wave on the fractal corresponds to this wave on the chart. It's amazing the nuances that get repeated. So even though this fractal originally played out on a very small time frame, we can see that the pattern has repeated on a much larger time frame this time around. Okay, so we're back at the original structure, and the part of the structure we're going to focus on is the box from 1906 to 1914. This roughly takes place in an 8-year time span. It is longer than the time frames or the boxes that came before it. It's also a range-bound time. These range-bound times, they can tend to actually last quite a while. I'm sure this was painful to go through at the time. So what we can do is we can copy this fractal and then compare it to the repeat of this structure. So let's go look at that box. Okay, so the box we're interested in is from 1966 to 1982. As you can see, it's also a range-bound time. However, this time it lasts twice as long, so roughly 16 years versus 8. So let's see if that fractal from 1906 to 1914 actually resembles what takes place from 1966 to 1982. Okay, so here is that fractal, and what we'll do is we'll roughly match it to the timing, height, and depth that we see on the chart in this box. And as you can see, there is a lot of similarities. They both do a series of waves. Now, some of this, the timing is actually a little different. You can see that in this box, it begins with a decline. We see a decline on the fractal. It then in this box has the first wave that takes place. We can see on the fractal, it moves up and then moves down. This wave matches the fractal pretty well. On this part of the chart, there is a little difference, and it mainly has to do with timing, height, and depth. We can increase the timing and height of some of this to see the resemblance. We can see that, yes, there is a wave here. Yes, there is a wave here, and the timing of this last wave would be something similar to this. Now, once you adjust it, they both, you can see, end with a decline. So while there are some differences, it's mainly due to the timing, height, and depth being different. Otherwise, the structure does repeat. Okay, so we're back at the original structure, and we're at a part where it moves up. So this is from 1914 to 1915. It was a brief time comparing to what came before it. Let's see how this structure, let's make a fractal out of it, compares to the part of the chart where this structure repeats. Okay, folks, you gotta love this. Look at the size of this structure. This takes place from 1982 to 2000. Again, it takes a really long time for this structure to play out. Let's compare how that original fractal or structure compares to this. So here is that original fractal. Look how tiny it is. But, once we stretch it to match the rough timing, height, and depth, we can see that it does what it's supposed to do. So we see a brief little wave at the bottom on both the fractal and the chart. It then moves up in the fractal and it moves up in the chart. It has a pullback on both the chart and on the fractal. After that, it kind of moves up at an angle on the fractal. It moves up at an angle on the chart. It then picks up the pace on the chart by moving up more aggressively, steeply. It does so on the fractal as well. And then we have some slight, well, it's not even deviation. It's just a different expression of the timing, height, and depth. So we have this part on the chart where it moves up aggressively, but then it kind of angles at a slightly different degree. This original structure had it a little more intense, but we still see an echo of that on the chart at this point. So while there are differences in the timing, height, and depth, we do see similarities. In fact, we could take this fractal and just play with it a bit more and see some of that difference in the timing, height, and depth. So if we adjust, we're just focusing on this move up right here, we can see how it kind of angles at a slightly different angle. It's never exact, but you can clearly see that the echo of the original structure plays out once again. The structure repeats with its own unique timing, height, and depth. Okay, so we're back at the original structure, and the part that we're going to focus on is from 1915 to 1921. This is another range-bound time. It's the final range-bound time before we go into Crazy Town over here. We're not there yet, so we need to focus on this. What we'll do is we'll make a fractal out of this, and we'll compare it to how this matches up when this structure repeats. Okay, so this structure repeated from 2000 to 2009. Many of you may remember this time. Welcome to the Great Recession. Welcome to the dot-com bust. So let's see how the original structure compares to what takes place in this box. So here is that original structure. Let's adjust it to the timing, height, and depth. It looks flat, by the way, because there's so much height and depth movement compared to this original structure. But as you can see, once adjusted to the rough timing, height, and depth, you see that it does a very similar thing. So it has its first wave, and then it has its second wave. Folks, this actually brings up a very interesting concept. We see that this great recession that takes place was actually baked into the cards all the way back from the original structure. That has a very interesting ramification. This recession, this Great Recession, was destined to take place. The dot-com bust was destined to take place. The 1987 crash was destined to take place. These are crazy claims, but as you can see, the structure is repeating. Now, of course, the timing, height, and depth, all that plays out uniquely, but we can say from this study that these structures are only repeating what the original structure did from 1896 to 1932. So all of what we experienced, as traumatic as it was when we went through this was written in the cards many, many, many years ago. In fact, it's going to play out again if the Dow Jones continues to last long enough. This structure will be different the next time around, but it will be a move up, a wave, a move up and a decline. Maybe it won't be as intense. Maybe it'll play out in a shorter time frame, maybe a longer time frame. I don't know. But what I would suggest based off this type of analysis is that something similar will play out once again. All right, so we're back here at the original structure, and it's official. We are now in Crazy Town. So the Dow Jones starts off within this range-bound time, nothing spectacular, but then something happens. It just comes to life, and man, it just moves up in a parabolic manner all the way to a needlepoint peak. All this that came before it was in preparation for this blow-off top. I imagine it must have been an amazing time to invest in the Dow Jones. You could probably throw money at all kinds of stuff and see returns. In fact, it may have been similar to recent years in the Dow Jones as well. Let's create a fractal out of this and compare it to what is taking place on today's chart, because today's chart is this structure. So let's see how that compares. Okay, so the box that we're in is from 2009 to 2025. So it is today's chart. And just like in the original structure, all this that came before it was in preparation for this box. This is the moment of glory for the entire structure. It is the blow-off top. Let's see how the structure from 1921 to 1929 compares to what is taking place on the chart today. So here is that structure. Let's stretch it to match the rough timing, height, and depth of the chart in this box. And as you can see, it does what it's supposed to do. It moves up. Now, there are some timing, height, and depth differences. So for instance, this move up in the fractal is this entire move up on today's chart. So today's chart, this section lasted much longer. In fact, to stretch it for this part to match this, I would have to really go crazy stretching it. I'm not going to do that. We can examine the next part that takes place. So this little flat area, we could see that the fractal, after this move up, goes into this flat area right here, after which it moves up. And again, the timing on this is not the same as today, but we can see it moves up. It even has this little pullback that we see on the chart, and then it continues to move up. Now, there is some differences. It does the same concept. So it has this wave right here, this move up and move back down on the fractal, which is tiny, but on today's chart, it took the cake. It was huge compared to what the fractal did. So we are now working on this section of the structure, and it is my belief that we are either at the peak, forming the peak, or we could potentially be already beginning on the decline, which would be the next box. However it plays out, even if it moves up a bit more, like say it surprises us and shoots up, we are still in the latter stages of this fractal. Let's zoom in on this part and get a better look at it. Okay, so we see this peak structure. Now, notice how I have what's taking place on today's chart in between both boxes. That's because I don't know what's happening. I actually don't. So here's the way I see it. This move up could continue to move up and make a new all-time high, or it could potentially just be a retrace. I think after this move up, whether it's a retrace or a new all-time high, it will then begin to turn over and we will enter into the declining phase. So let's go back to the original structure and examine that declining phase. Okay, so here we are at the declining phase of the original repetitive macro structure. This takes place from 1929 to 1932. So let's put this in perspective. We have 6 structures that take the Dow Jones from a kind of a range-bound time into a parabolic blow-off top. Just like in the Bible, we have 6 days of creation, and on the 7th is the day that God rests. Well, the 7th is the reset for the repetitive macro structure on the Dow Jones. So let's copy this structure and get a feel for what it does. And by the way, this hasn't happened yet, so it's going to be a speculative view of what this decline could potentially do. Okay, so here is that fractal, and we're not comparing it to anything on the chart, so this is a walk down speculation alley. Now, what I would say is that the coming structure is likely going to resemble this. Now, we don't know how much of a decline we're going to get. It could be what it was previously or similar to what it was previously. Let's go back and measure what that decline was. So we can see that from the peak to the trough is roughly about 89.50 something percent. I could be a little off on that. So as you can see, it was a big decline. Now, maybe it will be more than that. Maybe it will be less than that. I don't know. We need to be flexible. But let's talk about what is going on here in the big picture. So this decline is the reset to the entire chart starting from 1932 to current time, over 90 years. It's not going to be a Great Recession. It's not going to be a dot-com bust. It's not going to be a 1987 crash. This is going to be unique. This is its own unique beast. It's the reset of all of this. But having said that, it does play out, or at least it has played out fairly fast. It's not going to last 10 years. Oh, who knows? Maybe it will. But I don't think it's going to last that long. This structure is a relatively fast structure. It's fast and it's furious. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, I don't know, man, that's a lot to ask. I would say that there are several camps you could put us investors or traders into. There's the camp that thinks that something like this is going to play out. There's the camp that thinks that something like this will not play out. No recession, and definitely not a depression. And then there's the camp that's kind of unsure about things. They're on the fence. I hope this video has challenged the last two camps, the camp that thinks that it won't happen and the camp that's on the fence about it. I hope the information in this video has given you something to think about, something to chew on. A chart may seem random at face value, but as I've shown through this video and through this analysis, there's nothing random about this structure. I believe that truth can apply to other parts of our lives as well. Things in life do seem random, but I think that once you get past the filters of timing, height, and depth, whatever those are in other parts of our lives, we can step back and see the big picture. I think part of that big picture is that you are alive to go through this structure. I don't think that's random. I think that is intentional. I think you have a calling to go through this structure. I think I have a calling to navigate this structure. Sure, it's going to be challenging. I was watching Band of Brothers the other day, and that generation that went through World War II, they basically lived through the Great Depression. They were amazing people, and they're not called the greatest generation for nothing. I believe that those challenging moments, those difficult times, they make us better as people. So I believe if we do go through this, and it is a large decline, I believe that there is good to come from this. There's a verse in the Bible that I'm reminded of. It says, all things work together for good to them that love the Lord. I cling to those type of verses. Just from my own personal life, I've seen that come true. So I am not fearful of this. I'm sure it's going to be challenging, but hey, life is full of challenges. Well, those are a few of my views on this. Let's wrap this up. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, it'd be much appreciated if you hit that thumbs up button. And by the way, this is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. You need to do your own homework on this kind of stuff. I do encourage you to do your homework. Be prepared. Get your house in order. If you believe something like this is going to play out, you need to start preparing now because we are potentially very close. We could actually already be beginning this decline. We'll have to see how things play out. Maybe the tariff war was the kickoff for this. We'll have to see. And by the way, this first drop, that is going to be intense. Now, maybe it'll play out a little different, but I would not think that it's going to play out too different. Just as we've seen the differences throughout all of this, I would expect something similar to all of this. It follows the basic pattern, but it plays out unique in the process. So anyways, do your own research. This is not financial advice. If you did enjoy this video and you're not yet a subscriber, I recommend hitting that subscribe button. I'll continue to follow up on this chart as it continues to develop. And by the way, I have a Discord that I'm active on. It's connected to my Patreon. I'll put a link to my Patreon in the description of this video. It's a $5 a month subscription. You're welcome to join. I'm so glad you caught this video. I hope you catch my next one. Have a great day, and bye for now.